And this evening we finalize Learning Unit 7, and you'll find that Learning Unit 7 is key for the summative, the final project that you need to complete. It's also linked with Learning Unit 6. So my advice would be to work through Learning Unit 6 and 7. Even if you just listen to the recordings, there's key aspects or elements about academic writing, academic essays and how you structure them. That's important and vital that I'm going to look at those key aspects when I'm marking the final summative. And when you look at that summative, you'll see it's just one question, a large essay that you need to write. So your writing ability is what we're going to look at now. And then it asks that you reflect on project 1 and be mindful of ChatGPT tools, avoid using them. And if you're using them, remember the learnings from project 1, the reason why they wanted you to know what it's about so that you can use it smarter and give reference to that tool if you are going to decide to draw from it. But my advice would be to avoid using any AI tools, ChatGPT, for example, there's Gemini. Leave those tools and write purely from your own understanding, reflecting on the articles that you are drawing from, as you have already done or started to practice within your 2 projects. So academic essays, I think if you can remember our last conversation, we spoke about the transition in your sentences. We had the burger analogy with the layers of how your writing should be. And my advice again, reflect on those discussions so that you can structure your essay well. But in conclusion of that, we are at the last part of Learning Unit 7. And we're going to pick up from quoting and then pick up paraphrasing and then finalizing how you should write. And then I'll check in with each of you, your confidence levels around your structure of your essay and any questions you might have. So to get straight into it, quoting is one of the key elements that is used in academic writing. And we generally use it in a way where we want to emphasize exactly what an author has said, the way they said it. And we want to then give a reference to a specific phrase or line or sentence from an article, the way the author gave it, and we would then put it in quotation marks. So quoting is a clear way to show that you have read the academic sources thoroughly. And it will give me an indication where exactly to find that information. And it will give me a page number, it will give me the author's details so that it can show where it fits into your actual argument that you want to use. So just for clarity, to summarize or to remind you all when to use direct quotations or to use quotations in your writing. So you quote, number 1, when you want to be accurate in your writing. So when accuracy is vital, and you can't say it in any other way, but you want to use the specific punchline that is given by an author. So you don't want to summarize it, you don't want to paraphrase it, you want it to say exactly something powerful, for example, that the author is saying. You want to quote that particular author. That's when you use it. You use direct quotes when you're analyzing the text itself, when you want to take a paragraph or snippet from the writing and you just want to analyze that and indicate to me that this is the part that I'm speaking of, then you would take the text as it is and put it in quotation marks. The third bullet, you choose direct quotes for clarity when they are more to the point than summaries. So if it's a quotation that is direct and to the point, you're going to utilize direct quotes from authoritative authors to strengthen your argument. You can also employ direct quotes when the author's effective language enhances your point. Always position your quotation inside of a quotation marks to show that you have taken these exact words from someone else. And you can put those page numbers to show us exactly where that author has taken a particular text from. So these are generally reasons why we use quotation marks. And the emphasis of this, if you're going to forget, always know that it's when you want to bring a clear, concise, word for word snippet from someone else's work and put it in your own writing. You have to put it in quotation marks. You have to use your same in-text reference that you always use, but now you insert a page number for clarity so that I can know if I go to that particular article, I go to page 5, for example, I'll find exactly that wording there for context to show. And also so that the safer sign and all the referencing tools see that you've put it in quotation marks, they will then know that you've referenced it correctly and you're not plagiarizing, for example. Then the one key thing, and I think this is what Sia asked a couple of weeks ago, around the 5 to 10% regarding the higher education institutions. So it says higher education institutions usually limit direct quotes to between 5 and 10% of any assessment. So this ensures that the majority of your work would be in your own words, so that you can be evaluated on what you understand and what your skill levels are. So I think if those of you were on the call a couple of weeks ago, the question came up to say, ma'am, in the training they said we should only reference about 10% of the work. So after having done a bit of research and checked and prepared for this evening, I realized that question is linked to the quotation marks. So take note, you can only use direct quotations, just the word for word as the person used it. Only 5 to 10% of it can be direct quotations. The rest of it should be paraphrased, should be in-text reference, and should be supported by the various summary techniques that you are using. So I'm going to pause here for a second and ask you, in terms of quoting, do you more or less understand how to use it? And in your reference guide, have you seen examples of where direct quotes are used? Do you know how to use them? So I'm just going to pause for a second. This is very important. So I'm going to ask that you take the time to respond to me. In terms of quoting, are you confident enough? Do you know what I'm talking about? I see your hand. Rejoice, you may go.
Evening, ma'am. Sorry, I wanted to ask regarding adding a page number.
Mm-hmm.
Do we do it before the year or
It's after the year.
after?
Yes. I'll open the reference guide at the end and then we can just double check together to make sure that you
Yeah.
understand.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Last, I was looking for the reference guide.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it wasn't on the RC lane, like on the note. Is it on the board? Is it the board?
Yeah.
It wasn't there.
I think I've loaded it for you guys under my learning, my tools. Just
Yeah,
check.
but it's
Mhm.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
on
ma'am.
Sorry to interrupt. It's under your module, under DIAL module, under resources, where there's
Yes.
manual module outline and the assessment and the assignments. It's there.
Yeah. I think I did share that with you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Just double check and see, and then in the reference, my advice would be to highlight an example of how to use direct quotes and what the
Yeah.
page number should be, and then just copy that same technique for all the quotes. But remember, very few of them. I'll go to at the end, we'll look at the word count for this particular, and then we can work out more or less how many direct quotes can you use. But it should be loaded for you. You can let me know in the chat if you find it. Okay, but thank you for the question, Rejoice. On the chat, there's only 2 of you that have said yes. There's 10 of you online. Please may you indicate if you understand and you're comfortable with quoting before I move on to the next element of your writing.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not sure if it relates to what we're talking now, but I remember on the group when we were submitting part 2, I did ask everybody else if they also received a high score for their safe assign, and
Yeah.
someone else said they received over 50. And then when I looked at the highlighted parts, it highlighted the sources that I used, the headings, and my project one.
Yeah. Okay, no problem at all. Thank you for asking, Kalipile. So normally what happens is if I receive your assignment and the safe assign is high, you don't necessarily have to be worried about it because for 2 reasons. The project builds on the previous one, so it picks up some of the work that is similar from your previous submission. And also as an educator, as the marker from my side, I have to verify and read through your work to make sense of it. So I'll generally ignore headings and similarities from project 1. And then if I find that I copy and paste from your text and I put it in Google, for example, If it does pick up that there's a direct similarity and you didn't reference, I will then penalize or flag you depending on the severity of how you've referenced. But if it's high, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have done something wrong or that your work is copied. It just means that it's picking up similarities from your previous submissions, and I, as the marker, I need to verify and work through your work to make sense of what you've given. And if it is, in my perspective, fine, and I can understand what you are saying, and I see that you have reworked from project one, and I can justify it, I move on. Unless I see that if it goes through Safe Assign and it shows, for example, you've used exactly someone else's assignment, it will flag it. And I can then check and say, okay, I'm going to refer you to the intellectual integrity officers to double check or investigate. Or I can just say, no, I understand. This is similar from the previous project, for example. So don't worry too much unless I notify you that there is a problem. Because DIAL is a module of such a nature, it builds on the previous work. It is almost understandable that the similarity score will pick up. So don't worry too much. If you receive communication from me, then you know, okay, you've done something that I'm going to investigate or refer. But generally, I understand the context of the DIAL module to support you with that. I hope I'm answering your question. Okay. Okay, thanks, Rejoice. Okay, so the first one was quoting, and then how to integrate quotes effectively in your writing. I'm emphasizing this one more time just for clarity so that you're all aware. You're going to introduce the author of the quotation, basically. So I've given you an example at the bottom where before you even speak of an author, the idea would be to introduce the author. And you'll see at the end of the paragraph, there is a page number. 26 is the page that I can find this particular sentence or reference in terms of the quotes where I can go and find it. So there's an example of the work of Karl Marx, who's the author of the Communist Manifesto, and then the inverted commas follow afterwards with the exact wording as Karl Marx had said it. So this is an example for the first time that you use a reference of a particular author. You can write it in this way, where you say, Diana Robertson, author of the DIAL module, proclaims the following, and then you put my words in quotation marks. And at the end, you'll say in 2024 and which page number you can find this particular that particular sentence or extract from. So when you speak about the author for the first time, you are allowed to introduce the author. But all the other work that follow, you will then use it as an in-text reference. And I've given you another snippet on the screen so that you can see the difference. So at the top is the first one I'm referring to for when you speak about the author the first time. And then following that is where you can say Marx also contains that, and you put quotation marks, and the year will follow again. So ideally, this is an example of, it's not the only way you can do it. You probably have done it in different formats where you use different in-text references, because we could have also said Marx 1848 and put the in-text right next to his surname and then put the quotation marks. So ideally, this is just an example to show you. The first time you use it, you can refer to the author, and then thereafter, you can speak towards his name and include him in the write-up. Another way you can also use quotation marks is by you make the quotation marks part of the sentence. So this is almost where you paraphrase from it and put the quotation marks within your sentence where you're trying to speak of it to elaborate. I've put an original example at the top where you'll see it says simply put, and then the quotation marks follow, and this was by an author in 2020. And if you look at the example at the bottom, you'll see it says, for one key way to assess the effectiveness of a paragraph is that then follows the quotation mark. So you can make it part of your broader sentence and add it and embed it in a sentence, or linking to what you want to say or how you want to structure your sentence. So this is another way of doing it. You could do it first by referring to the author. You can also do it by embedding a quotation mark in your sentence as well. Sia, I see your hand. I'm not sure if it was by mistake, but I can't hear you. If you are unable to use your mic, maybe type on the chat for me. So generally, these two examples that I've given you are common ways of doing it. And remember, you're going to restrict your writing of using quotation marks. So don't use it too much. I would say if you've used 2 quotations for that particular essay, it's enough. Stay away from it to avoid that I need to flag or penalize or take marks away for using quotation marks. So if you've used it once or twice, that should be sufficient. Lean on your own critical thinking for the rest of your writing. The next key element that I'm sure you should all be comfortable with, or at least know what I'm talking about, is paraphrasing. And I know that we have discussed this previously, and it's about taking the words that you receive, or a paragraph, or an article that you've read, and turning it into your own words to show your understanding of what you've read. But you still give credit to the author whose work you've taken, even though it's now in your own words. So just know, even if it's influenced by someone else, you have to acknowledge that person. If it's in your own words, you still have to acknowledge where the source for your writing comes from. So there's 5 ways for effective paraphrasing. And these are just clues that you can use, but I think over the first 2 projects, you might have played around with paraphrasing and have an idea. So number 1, reread the original passage a lot of times. Don't just read once and paraphrase. Perhaps read it twice. Write it down in your own words, read it again, change your own words again, so that you make sure that it's unique to what you want to say. And also to make sure that you understand fully what you've read. We did go through reading techniques in the previous learning unit, so reflect on those tips as well. Then it says, set the original text aside and write the paraphrasing in your own words. Number 3, check your paraphrase against the original text and make sure that you've retained the original meaning. And I think number 3 is probably the most crucial thing that you need to remember. Sometimes when we're paraphrasing a lot, we lose the depth or the meaning of what the author was actually saying. So if you're changing the wording, you're not changing the meaning of what they are saying. So be careful of that. It takes a bit of skill, and it asks that you are attentive to number 3. Number 4 says, make sure that you have substantially changed the grammar and the wording, and I think that speaks to the first point that I was making. So if you reread it, you will make sure, or you'll change a bit of the writing, the grammar and the wording, maybe the structure, maybe you'll add synonyms, maybe you'll change terms, but the meaning should still remain the same. Then the last one, make sure to reference the source from which you got the information. And I think I've emphasized that one in the beginning. So I'm going to put paraphrasing on the chat and just ask you just a thumbs up or just a yes or a no, depending on where you're sitting with paraphrasing. Are you all clear what this means? And you can be sure that you're going to use this particular technique in your writing. So are you comfortable with paraphrasing, and do you understand more or less if I say change the wording but not the meaning? Take note of that. So just a thumbs up or down, are you good? And this is practice. It comes with a lot of practice, but it's something that you all, by now, after having gone through Project 2, should be able to do. Okay, there's 4 of you, 10 of you online. Please, may the others as well respond so I can just get a sense of where are we with the writing. I think this is probably the most difficult project at the end, to put the best English forward, to put it in academic terms, to write formally, to structure your words in a way that shows you can critically think. So this one's going to take a bit of time. And it does not need a just-in-time session to tell you what to do with this one. I think after having read through it, it's quite simplistic and straightforward. You just need to put your writing skills to work now. So for this particular summative that's upcoming, please, I am emphasizing, read through Learning Unit 6 and 7 again in its totality, and then start your writing, but do bits of it each day. Start with your introduction, refresh your mind a bit. The next day, unpack the body part of it, and then take a couple of times to read through it and almost perfect it, but it takes a lot of work. There's only one question. I think it's a 1,000-word essay. I'm not sure. I'll check for us at the end again. Okay, but back to what we need to think about. For paraphrasing techniques, just note the following 3 things as emphasis for before I move on to the next part. So the 3 things that you need to think about for paraphrasing is this. Use synonyms for what the author is trying to say. So find synonyms, which means another way of saying something or another word for something, to change the sentence or the structure or the wording a bit. Remember, we still give reference to that particular order. But you have to do it in such a way that you won't be picked up for poor referencing. So you have to do it well. So practice using synonyms. You'll see on a Word document or on a, if you highlight a word or you right click on the word, there'll be an option for synonym that pops up on the drop down list. Or you can take it and paste it into Google and say, find synonym for this particular word. Or you can just use your grammar tools that you have, but ideally find a technique that works for you, that you will find ways to find alternative words for a particular verb or adverb or adjective or whatever term it is that you need to write about. The second bullet says change the word form, the tense, and the voice. Be conscious of the way the author is writing, and sometimes, generally in articles, they write either in the present or past tense. You have to bring it back into the present in your own writing. So be careful if they wrote did or had, and you want to write it in the current context, then you have to change the wording around to fit with what you are saying. So make your writing fit for purpose so that you are writing in the proper tense, in the proper tone, in the proper voice, in an active voice. Because sometimes the tenses of what articles you use, depending on how they structure it, they might write in a different tense that does not align with your particular writing. Then lastly, reorder the main ideas. In the author's writing that you take or paraphrase from, the ideas might be in a different structure. You might want to change it when you are paraphrasing. So you might want to place it in a different format or restructure the sentence entirely and put the main idea in a different perspective for us to see. And at the end, still give reference to that particular author. Then one of the last elements that we are going to talk about is editing and proofreading. This is key in your upcoming summative. The ability to edit your work and the ability to proofread it are 2 things that are interlinked. The one can't go without the other. So proofreading is part of editing, but editing is much more than proofreading. And so this is where the distinction between the 2 come in. So let's start with editing first. Editing is the process of revising the content, how you organize it, consider your grammar, and the presentation of a piece of writing. So I think many of us have edited our work at some point. It's where you're fixing it to align with and organize it in a particular way. It's where you're checking your grammar, how you present it, and you look at your overall writing, the structure of it. But proofreading means that you're now checking for the accuracy of it. The accuracy in a piece of writing that is nearly complete. So this is towards the end of your work once you've structured it already. And it includes checking smaller details. So now you are a bit more explicit. You are going to proofread your own work, read it out loud, say it to yourself. Sometimes you can even ask a relative or someone who's not in your class that can possibly copy your work or take your ideas. But you ask someone objective if what you've written makes sense. And this is where you try to get that final bits and pieces together. Yes, you're also going to check your grammar here. Yes, you're also going to check your spelling and your punctuation as well. So for proofreading, many students use tools to help them check their work, as well as for editing. So I want to ask you in the chat, have you used any tools to help you check your grammar, check your spelling, or to edit and proofread your work? Have any of you used any tools to check your work, any applications, any tools, and can you share what they were? How are you proofreading or spell checking your work? How are you editing your work currently? I'm going to give you a minute to let me know. Microsoft usually Grammarly, okay? Okay, so on MS Word, there are spelling and grammar tools that you can use. Grammarly is probably the most common tool that many students use, and there's a free version that you can use, and it's quite productive in the sense that once you ran your work through it, it more or less has done the bulk of the editing for you. My tip for you would be don't lean on Grammarly entirely and just submit. After you've put your work through Grammarly, still read it again. Because sometimes it has its own American way of changing your English, or it will change your S's to Z's, and it will change the format of how South African context or write-up should be done. So yes, it is a powerful tool to use. Many students use it, and there's nothing wrong with using it because it's just taking your work and it's editing what you have said. It doesn't give you new information. So you can use that tool. It has not been flagged as a possible intellectual integrity problem yet, so you may use it. It's just going to help you structure your work accordingly. Using the tools that's on MS Word is also fine, and it does underline, and there is spelling and grammar settings that you can set for it to pick up and help you rephrase and highlight where there's punctuation errors and. So you're more than welcome to use tools to help you with this last bit of your journey. So once you've structured your write-up and you've got your conclusion, you've got all your structured sentences and your paragraphs, you've in-text reference, you may put it through these tools to help you. And my advice, once you've put it through at the end and you're 100% sure that you are done, you can now go back and reflect on reading it one more time in front of the mirror, out loud to yourself, and hear yourself if it sounds correct, if your tenses are correct, if you've got if you are struggling to understand what you're reading, then perhaps that would be a sign of let's sit and restructure that particular sentence. But the idea is that at the end of this particular setup or writing, you would have confidence to know that you've gone from project one and improved in your writing by the end when you submit your summative. So generally, editing and proofreading is about checking the structure and the fine print of what you are submitting before you do so. Then at the end, the key things that you just need to take away from is to proofread your work, as we've said. Consider the writing style and the voice, as we've said. Continually reread and review your work all the time. So after you've written an introduction, review it again. Check where new terms are, where you need to put a reference. Ask yourself again, compare it to the reference guide, and recheck all the time if you review your work all the time. And then my last advice was that you need to use Learning Unit 6 and 7 aspects as a checklist. And that then brings us to the end of Learning Unit 7 in its totality for you to now start with the summative project. Ideally, the summative, I just want to check the word count. Because they've put these protective aspects over the document, I can't share the document directly from my side, but I assume you all have access to the document from your side. The marks for question 1 in this particular summative is for 100 marks for just question 1. And you're going to write an essay from 1,000 to 1,500 words, which is your own position with evidence that we need to see. It's going to ask that you revise various learning units from what we've covered, and I've given you hints on which learning units to check through. It's going to again indicate that you need to use MS Word as we've talked about previously. You're going to include at least 3 relevant quotes, at least 3 instances of relevant paraphrasing. So just a correction, in the beginning or during our session, I said use 2. Let's align with what they're asking. They say 3 instances of relevant quotes and 3 paraphrasing credible essays throughout the essay, or 3 credible or relevant paraphrasing. All the quotes and paraphrasing must be accurately and appropriately referenced as we've discussed. You're going to, as part of your argument, include at least 2 relevant examples or at least 1 relevant counter argument in your writing. You're going to edit and proofread, as we just discussed, and you're going to use that marking rubric as a checklist again. Use that as your final editing tool. Print out that rubric and tick on it or highlight on your laptop if you are tech savvy and you don't want to necessarily use paper, but highlight it step by step to check if you've covered all the expectations that it asks you. And then when 100% sure, you're going to submit your MS Word document as summative project 1. But as you can see, there's nothing tricky about this particular one. There's nothing that you can misinterpret and nothing that a just-in-time session can tell you to confuse or to the structure and the expectation of this particular essay now. It's purely about your critical thinking, how you write and how you read what an article is saying and how you give it back to make a statement, how you make a counter argument for a statement you want to make. Can you paraphrase? Can you use quotations? And can you do so effectively as we've discussed in the past? And my hint is reflect on that burger analogy with the structure of what the essay should be like. If you do that, you should be fine. And I know 1,000 to 1,500 sounds like a lot of words. And they say only 3 paraphrasing and 3 quotations. So what else does the other words require? That is your own voice and the critical thinking of the arguments you're going to make. So this is not a quick write-up. It's something that's going to take time if you want to do a good enough job to pass the summative. But it's quite straightforward on what you need to do from my perspective. I'm going to ask you 2 questions on the chat and then we can conclude for this evening. My first question is, do you have access to the summative project? So that's my first question. If you can indicate, and then Rejoice, I'll come to you at the end of my second question. So do you all have access to the summative? Okay, I've got 1 yes.
I wanted to say, where can I find it? Because it's not on my, I can't find it.
You can't find it.
only
You're going to have to,
material.
yes,
Huh?
you
Sorry?
have to find it. Sorry, you can answer?
It's under student material.
Student material.
So you access your student material on the Rosebank SharePoint portal, and then under student material you go to IIE student materials CAT, and then DIAL5111w 2024. And then it's there. It's DIAL5111w _ summative project.docx. It's a Word document.
Okay, thanks.
Cool.
Yeah, it's in a Word format, and yeah, I think it would be best if you access it directly from the SharePoint. But if you are stuck, just drop me an email as well. Okay, so those who don't have it, it was explained now where we can find it on the SharePoint. I hope that you're all going to perhaps try it while we are online, so you can give an indication if you are able to find it. Then the second part of my question was, let me just go back to the word. I made a note. Thank you, Litlochonolo. There's the link for those of you who don't have it. I just want to go back to the dial just to check my notes. Okay, so I'm going to finalize all my marking. I'm going to try and push through this evening. I saw quite a bit of students miss the submission for project 2, but I'm going to push to get your marking done. And then I'm going to also go back and give feedback on the various ICE tasks just for guidelines. And then finally, I uploaded another ICE task just as a grace ICE task for those of you who could not get to 4 ICE tasks minimum. I'm going to ask that if you are one of those candidates who, or participants or students who did not fully engage with ICE tasks or didn't complete all 4 or minimum 4, I'm going to ask that you complete the 5th one as a supplementary ICE task. So it's not compulsory for all of you. There are some of you who generally commit to this module and you've done everything you needed to do. You've got minimum 4 ICE tasks that I've asked. You've done your part. So it's not for you if you've done all 4 already. But the students who have not done all 4, I've loaded a 5th one. And I'm going to ask that by the end of this week, so on Friday evening at 7 o'clock, that you would have taken this week to complete that particular task. If you have done so, then there's an additional, at least another opportunity for me to help you gain from the 10% that the ICE tasks give you to add to your mark. So please do take advantage of that. Complete the 5th one if you have not completed all the other 4. For the students who have generally done it, you've done an amazing job. Thank you for committing to this module. You don't need to do the last ICE task that I'm speaking of. So you'll see under more resources, I think under ICE activities, there's a 5th ICE task. It's probably titled or named ICE task 5. If you see it, please note that it's for you if you have not done all your ICE tasks. Little Khonola, I see your hand.
Yes, ma'am. Regarding the ICE tasks, I heard somebody in another class. I'm not sure. Maybe it's this one. Maybe it was you, ma'am. But they said basically the ICE task marks the submission of the ICE tasks matters more than the marks themselves that we get on the ICE tasks. And I wanted to find out if we can get more clarity on how they are marked or how they contribute to the final mark. Is it from us just submitting that we get the 10 points, or the mark that we got from that particular ICE task, does that mark contribute to the final mark? I'm not sure if you understand.
I think I do. Not 100% sure of the statement that was made, but ideally for us, we want you to participate in those ICE tasks, and we want to see how well you do so that we can gauge whether you understood the work, whether you have a challenge, whether I should maybe repeat certain elements, maybe there's misconceptions. So the ICE tasks are super important. It gives us an indication of where you fit. However, there is a consideration for, let's say you did an ICE task, it's out of 10, but you did not necessarily, let's say you got 2 out of 10. I can't then fail you on the ICE task or say, no, you can't get your 10% because you got 2. I need to, as a lecturer, reach out to you and give you the support you need to gain better marks. But I need to acknowledge that you've submitted the work at the level that you did and still accumulate your 10% towards your ICE task. So I hope that makes sense, that your mark for a specific is an indicator for us, whether you understand or not. And then your contribution is an add-on to accumulate out of 10% a particular percentage for ICE, for that integrated curriculum activities or engagement activities. So that in a nutshell is what it's about. So let's say you've done all 4. You will then be captured, and I will motivate and say, Little Khonolo's done all 4. He deserves his 10%. He committed. And when I interacted with him and gave him feedback, he understood, and he's now on the same page. So ignore the 2. I support that he has done all 4. And let's give him his 10%. But then perhaps Diana was in class, but she didn't really submit. She did 1. And then they'll work out of 10%. If she only did 1 ICE task, she then gets perhaps 2% from the 10%. So it's about engaging. It's about using these tools to get you to equip yourself with the insight for the POE. But generally, it's about doing all 4 and committing to what is asked of you to do. So if you've done a minimum of 4, you should be fine to gain the 10%, if that answers the question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. So for the students online, just a reminder, if you've missed an ICE task, I'm giving you another opportunity to complete another one so that I can just accumulate and help you gain. The 10% could be the difference between you getting a distinction. It could be a difference between you passing the module. So don't underestimate the value of that 10% or the 5% or whatever it is that you are going to get or how much you've participated. It is definitely a deal breaker for some of us, depending on where we land, marks. So that in itself, now the ball is in your court for the final summative. And if you need me, I'll still be available on email, and we've got one more week next week. So if you want to, next week, you can bring an example of your work to class. You can ask me, Di, am I referencing correctly? This is a snippet of what I'm doing. Do you think this is on the right track? Is this? So all the questions that you have around your work, if you use this week to at least structure or start with it, then I can, in our final lecture, give you all individual input to give you a sense of where you are, what you can do to improve.